The day had been long, and the sun was slowly melting into the dusty horizon. Jack rode back to his ranch with tired eyes and a heavy heart. The wild wind of the plains brushed against his hat, and his horse's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the dry ground. He had spent 3 days searching for a few missing cattle, and though he found them, he felt a strange pull in his chest, the kind that comes when something unexpected is waiting ahead. The sky was turning orange and purple when Jack noticed a faint shape lying near the edge of the creek. At first he thought it was a bundle of cloth or a fallen deer, but as his horse slowed down and drew closer, he saw something that made his heart freeze. It was a woman. She was lying on her side, half covered in dust. Her skin was pale, her lips dry and cracked, and her hands thin as bones. Her hair was tangled and filled with sand, and her dress was torn in several places. Jack jumped off his horse and knelt beside her, his hands shaking slightly. He touched her shoulder gently. She was cold but still breathing, faintly, weakly, like someone who had been fighting for days just to stay alive. Without a second thought, Jack lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her head rested against his chest as he carefully placed her on his horse and began the slow ride back home. The path was rough and the night wind grew colder, but Jack didn't stop. He could feel her breathing faintly against his arm, and that was enough to keep him going. By the time he reached the ranch, the stars had filled the sky. The old lantern outside the house flickered softly. Inside, Martha, the elderly woman who had been helping him since he was a boy, looked up in shock as he entered carrying the frail stranger. "Good heavens, Jack," she gasped, rushing forward. "Who is she?" "I don't know," he said, laying the woman gently on the spare bed. "But she needs help." Together they worked through the night. Martha cleaned the woman's wounds and warmed some water, while Jack sat by the bed waiting, hoping. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady. He gave her small sips of water, brushed the dust off her face, and covered her with a blanket. The hours crawled by, and just as dawn began to break, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment she looked lost, as if she didn't remember who she was or where she had come from. Her eyes were gray, soft, yet filled with fear. She tried to sit up, but her weak arms gave out. Jack reached forward. "Easy," he said in a calm voice. "You're safe here. Don't try to move." She blinked, studying his face. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Where am I?" "On my ranch," he replied. "You were lying near the creek." "I found you yesterday evening." She closed her eyes and nodded weakly. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "My name's Ella." Then she turned her face toward the window and fell asleep again. Over the next few days, Ella slowly began to heal. Martha cooked her warm soup, and Jack brought fresh water from the well. She stayed mostly quiet, sometimes staring out the window as if lost in thought. Her hands were small and trembling, but there was something strong in her eyes, something that told Jack she had survived more than most could handle. When she was strong enough to walk, she began helping Martha in the kitchen. Though she moved slowly, she insisted on working. Jack noticed how she always looked toward the North Hills when she stepped outside, her expression a mix of sadness and worry. He wanted to ask her what had happened, but he didn't. He knew some stories were too heavy to share before the heart was ready. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold and red, Jack was mending the fence near the barn when he saw her standing nearby. The light hit her hair, making it glow softly. She still looked thin and fragile, but there was a quiet grace in the way she stood, like someone learning to live again. He walked over and handed her his jacket. "It gets cold after sunset," he said. She smiled faintly, holding the fabric close. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," he said. For a moment they stood in silence, listening to the sounds of the wind and the horses in the stable. Then she turned her eyes to him, a small tear glistening in the corner. "You saved my life, Jack. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he said softly. "Anyone would have done the same." She looked down at her hands and shook her head. "No one else came. I called for help, but no one came." Her words sank into his chest like a stone. He didn't know what pain she carried, but in that moment, he understood one thing. She had been left alone when she needed someone most. From that day forward, Jack found himself watching over her without even realizing it. When she went to feed the chickens, he made sure she didn't carry the heavy bucket alone. When she sat outside in the evenings, he brought her tea. He never said much, and she never asked for more. But the silence between them started to feel comfortable, almost peaceful. Yet peace rarely lasts long in the Wild West. One morning, Jack noticed something strange. A few hoof prints near the fence line that didn't belong to his horses. He followed the tracks and saw that they led toward the hills, then vanished. Later that evening, one of his young colts went missing. The next day, he found a torn piece of fabric caught on a bush near the corral. Someone had been close, too close. Jack didn't tell Ella about it. He didn't want to frighten her, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was watching the ranch. That night, as the stars lit up the dark sky, Jack sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees. The night air was cool and the coyotes howled in the distance. He saw Ella's shadow appear behind the window curtain. She was looking toward the hills again, just as she had every evening. When she noticed him watching, she turned away quickly and blew out her lamp. He wondered what memories haunted her, who she was running from, and what had left her half dead near that creek. The next morning, she looked calmer, even smiled as she helped Martha bake bread, but Jack could see a quiet sadness behind that smile. Later, when he brought her a bucket of water, she looked up at him and said softly, "I owe you my life, Jack, but I fear trouble may follow me." He met her eyes, steady and kind. "Then we'll face it when it comes." For the first time, she smiled with real warmth. It was small, but it reached her eyes. That night, as Jack sat by the window, he thought about how much she had changed since the day he found her. She had gone from a ghost of a woman to someone who brought light back into the house. The ranch no longer felt lonely. The sound of her laughter with Martha filled the evenings, and even the horses seemed calmer when she was near. But outside, beyond the hills, a campfire flickered in the distance, faint but visible. Jack saw it through his binoculars and felt his gut tighten. He didn't know who was out there or what they wanted, but deep down he knew this peace wouldn't last forever. He turned his eyes back to the house, where Ella was softly singing to herself as she washed the dishes. The sound was gentle and full of life, a sound that made the whole ranch feel alive again. He smiled faintly, then looked back toward the dark ridge. Whoever was out there, whatever was coming, he was ready, because now this place wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was home, and she was part of it. Days passed, and peace slowly returned to the ranch, or at least it seemed that way. Ella had grown stronger, and her cheeks no longer looked pale. Her hair, once dull and tangled, now caught the sunlight when she stepped outside. She smiled more often, helping Martha with the animals, feeding the hens, and tending the garden. Jack noticed how she laughed softly when the young foals nuzzled her hands. For a man who had lived in silence for so long, her laughter had become the sweetest sound in the world. Yet behind those calm days, Jack's instincts told him something wasn't right. He couldn't forget the campfire he had seen glowing faintly on the ridge. Every night he would step out after dinner, rifle in hand, and watch the horizon. The glow came and went. Sometimes it was closer, sometimes gone completely. But one thing was certain: someone was out there. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Jack saw Ella sitting near the corral, stroking one of the horses. He walked over, careful not to startle her. The orange light touched her face, and for the first time he noticed how peaceful she looked. It was hard to believe she was the same fragile woman he had carried from the creek just weeks ago. "You've been quiet today," Jack said, leaning against the fence. She didn't look at him right away. "I've been thinking," she said softly. "About what comes next." "What do you mean?" Her fingers traced the horse's mane as she spoke. "You saved me, Jack. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. But I can't hide forever." Jack's brow furrowed. "Hide from who?" She finally looked up, her gray eyes serious. "From the men who left me in that desert. They think I'm dead." The air went still. Even the horse stopped moving. Jack felt his grip tighten on the wooden fence. Who were they? Ella took a deep breath. They were part of a small gang. My father used to run a trading post near the border. When he died, some men came claiming we owed them money. They took everything we had. I tried to escape, but they caught me. I thought they'd finish me off, but instead they left me out there to die. I walked for miles before I collapsed by that creek. Jack didn't speak for a long time. His jaw tightened and his eyes darkened. He had seen his share of cruelty in the West, but hearing it from her lips made his heart twist with quiet anger. "You're safe here," he said finally, his voice steady. As long as I'm breathing, no one will touch you. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. I know, but I'm scared they might come looking. He gave her a small smile. Then let them. This land's seen worse than a few cowards. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what she said. He checked the rifle by the door twice, then sat on the porch watching the stars. The wind carried faint sounds, a coyote's cry, the whisper of grass, and somewhere far away, the echo of hooves. By morning, Jack was already saddling his horse. He planned to ride out and check the ridge again. Before leaving, he found Ella in the barn feeding the animals. Don't worry, he told her. I'll be back by noon. She looked uneasy. Please be careful. I always am, he said with a faint grin, then rode off toward the hills. The trail was quiet except for the sound of the horse's steps. Jack scanned the horizon, following the tracks he had seen before. After a few miles, he found signs of a small camp. Ashes still warm, boot prints in the dirt, and a torn piece of cloth with the mark of a snake stitched into it. He remembered that mark. A few years ago, he'd heard stories about a gang that used it, the Snake Riders. They were known for stealing and leaving no witnesses. He didn't stay long. He returned to the ranch quickly, his mind racing. Whoever had been there was close, too close. When he arrived, he found Ella waiting on the porch, her face pale. You were gone longer than you said, she said quietly. He dismounted and handed her the cloth. You were right, he said. They're out there, but they're not getting near this place. That evening, Jack reinforced the gates and checked every lock. Martha, though older, sensed the tension and stayed close to Ella. The ranch felt different that night, quiet but not peaceful. Around midnight, the dogs began barking. Jack grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. The moon was bright enough to light the yard. For a few seconds, he saw nothing. Then from the shadows near the barn came the faint sound of boots on gravel. Who's there? He called out. No answer. Just silence. He waited, heart steady, eyes fixed. Then a figure moved, quick, low, and running toward the corral. Jack fired a warning shot into the air. The figure froze, then vanished behind the fence. And stay inside, he shouted toward the house. But Ella was already at the door, her face full of fear. Jack, it's them! He didn't waste time. He moved quietly along the side of the barn, rifle ready. From the darkness, a voice called out. We don't want trouble, cowboy. Just the girl. Hand her over and we'll leave you in peace. Jack's voice was calm but cold. You picked the wrong ranch. A shot rang out, hitting the ground near his boots. Jack ducked and returned fire, the sound echoing through the night. The dogs barked wildly and the horses whinnied in fear. After a few moments, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. When Jack looked again, the men were gone. Only dust and shadows remained. He walked back to the porch where Ella stood shaking. They'll come again, she said quietly. Jack nodded. Then we'll be ready. The next few days were tense. Jack repaired the fences and set traps along the path leading to the ranch. Ella tried to help, but he insisted she rest. He could see the worry in her eyes, but also something else. Courage. She refused to run, refused to hide again. On the fourth night, the attack came. 3 men on horses charged toward the ranch under the cover of darkness. Jack had been waiting. The first shot shattered the stillness, and the lead rider's horse reared back. The others scattered. Jack took cover behind the well, firing again. 1 man fell and the others fled into the darkness. When it was over, the yard was silent except for the sound of horses snorting. Ella ran out, calling his name. Jack stepped out from behind the well, breathing heavily but unharmed. It's over, he said. They won't be coming back. Tears filled her eyes as she rushed to him. You could have been hurt. He smiled gently. You think I'd let that happen? Not with you here. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to peace. Word spread quickly that the Snake Riders had been driven off by a rancher who refused to back down. Some said they saw the men riding away for good, never daring to return to that valley again. As spring turned into summer, Ella's spirit fully returned. She planted flowers near the porch, their colors bright against the dusty land. She sang while working, and laughter often filled the house again. Martha said it was like the sun had moved into the ranch itself. One evening, Jack sat on the porch watching her water the flowers. The golden light touched her face, and he could hardly believe this was the same fragile girl he had found by the creek. Months ago, she had become strong, graceful, and full of life, the kind of woman who brought warmth to even the wildest land. Ella looked up and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" Jack smiled back. "Just wondering how the Wild West ever looked so beautiful." She laughed softly, her eyes shining. "It's not the land, Jack, it's the people who make it home." He nodded, feeling something deep in his chest, a peace he hadn't felt in years. The wind moved gently across the plains, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and warm earth. The ranch was quiet again, but not lonely. Ella had found her strength, and Jack had found something he never expected: hope. From that day on, whenever people passed by his ranch, they often said the same thing. They spoke of a woman who had once been nothing but skin and bones, and of the man who gave her a second chance at life. And though the Wild West remained rough and wild on that small piece of land, something rare had taken root: kindness, courage, and love strong enough to tame even the hardest hearts.